come around and do the slides. Do I need to, oh, this is B, isn't it? B? Yeah. So today I'm going to talk about attention, concentration, and depression. Slide, please, Alec. So what is attention? Attention is grasping one of several trains of thoughts while there are a lot still going on in your mind. So essentially, every day we go about our business and we have like lots of different things that we could do, like lots of different alternative ideas. Like I could run out right now, you know, run away from the presentation or things like that. You have lots of different ideas you can do, and attention is grasping one of those and sticking with it and giving it your attentional resources to do the job effectively. So attention controls our everyday experience. Everything like we attend shapes like who we are, because you know, some people will notice things over other things. So yeah, our perception and our attention are linked in that sense. Slide, please. So examples of attention, we've got the Stroop effect. When you're doing the Stroop task, basically the capacity of your attention is that you can show how your attention is limited. When you get incongruent stimuli, I think everyone here knows the Stroop task, so I won't go into it too far, but yeah, when you get incongruent stimuli, you take like a longer to produce like the result in the test. So cocktail party, where you like filter out information. So yeah, I'm trying to filter out everyone else giving presentations and focus on what I'm saying, so that's like an attentional kind of skill. There's attenuation, where you weaken certain stimuli, so that's pretty much the same thing in terms of filtering, like I'm weakening everyone else's voice so that I can hear what I'm saying, and you guys are presumably doing the same if you're not daydreaming. Then there's the attentional blink, which I'm pretty sure was found in this university under Jane Raymond.
I edited the whole thing.
Boom! There we are, see? Attentional blink. There we are, so from our very own university. The attentional blink just shows the capacity of our memory, in the sense that in terms of a serial number of stimuli, if you're doing a test, you won't remember the second stimuli as well as the first because of how quickly you can process things. And interestingly, there's an interaction with emotion, because if you see an emotional stimuli first, I can never remember it now. Now I've got to think about it. The emotional stimuli basically gives you a larger attentional blink, because an emotion is something, like an emotional word is something you really latch onto, and it takes a lot more processing, so you then have a longer attentional blink. Alright, next slide please, Alec. So attention allocation, this is the last kind of theory of attention that I want to run by today, and that's by Kahneman in 1973. And his basic theory is that attention is a resource, and there's only so much of it. So essentially, we have to allocate it to the right places to effectively deal with our environment. There's a factor of arousal in there as well, in the terms of if something isn't arousing enough, you don't pay attention to it, and that's fact. Like, you can't pay attention to something that's really boring. I can't stare at this blue carpet for hours on end and get really entranced by it. And at the same time, if the person over there who's presenting starts taking their top off, I'm not going to be able to effectively present to you guys. So it's all about keeping arousal balanced. Attention for survival, so like our attention can be modified by things in our environment, so like loud noises. So if Jesse slams a hammer into the board, I'm probably going to be taken away from my presentation for a minute. And then to add on to that as well, we also have pressures in our society. So we're really good as humans at working offline, so despite the fact that I'm giving a presentation to you, I'm also concerned that you're not enjoying it, and I'm also thinking about what I want to have for lunch when I go to Yates in about 2 hours' time. So there's a lot of different things going on in my mind while I'm giving a presentation, and that affects how well you deal with your environment. Alec? So, schools, which is sort of what today is about. You know, it's what we do here, education. Children are learning a curriculum, so math, science. You know, you all remember in primary school you had to draw graphs in maths and you had to learn to spell in English. But kids are also learning to deal with their environment. They always talk about personal growth in primary schools. Like, you get a report and it's like, oh, your child has learned to do this, they've learned to spell this. But we're not really focusing on how the child is growing as a person and the way they deal with their environment. And those things, I think, are actually quite key, and we don't focus on them enough. Learning requires concentration, but when I was like 7 years old, I just wanted to be a rocket ship, just run around school, you know. I didn't want to learn because that wasn't fun and it didn't really engage me. So I think that attention is a skill, and I don't think children have really been taught to effectively control their attention, and I think that shows in the education system. Malinowski, time for some research, found that mindfulness meditation improved allocation of attentional resources. So even after an 8-week program, which is similar to what I'm doing in my mindfulness module this semester, even after like an 8-week training program, you start to be able to process things differently. There are changes in the function of your brain and the structures of it as well. Alec? So event-related potentials, which is interesting, what I'm doing my dissertation on. So that's essentially measuring brain waves. There have been a lot of studies on attention done through ERP. Slagder et al., that's a funny name, 2007, found that meditators have a lower attentional blink. So when I was talking earlier about how quickly you can process a second stimuli in serial presentation, when you like long-term meditators can process things quickly, so it effectively shows that they have a better efficiency of allocating their attentional resources, and that's all down to neuroplasticity as well. And I've talked about that in my last thing. And that exercise, mindfulness, all those different skills, they all increase neuroplasticity. Moore, Gruber, DeRose, and Malinowski, again Malinowski, 2012. Found decreased resources deployed in a Stroop task for meditators. So the Stroop task I talked about earlier, that's all about finding the incongruent stimuli and being able to effectively deal with that. And meditators, essentially, they have an attentional amplification for the congruent stimuli, not the incongruent. So it just shows that your early processing, even like 100 milliseconds after the stimulus onset, you're already starting to process your environment quicker and be more effective about it. Next slide, please. ADHD, I briefly covered this. I don't have a very good knowledge of it myself, so I'm kind of not going to go into it too far. I need to read up on it more. But ADHD is and ADD is attentional deficit disorders, and a lot of kids in schools are going to specifically struggle because they have these conditions. And I wanted to know, just briefly, if mindfulness could be applied to that population. And Zielowska, 2008, explored the feasibility of using mindfulness for ADHD populations and found that it did work in both adults and kids. So it's worth having a look at that. And Singh et al., 2010, he introduced mindfulness to children and the parents, because essentially apparently one of the problems with ADHD children is compliance and getting the kids to actually make an effort to do stuff on their own. And I think the big problem with ADHD is that we generally deal with it with contingency management, so behavioral psychology and drugs, and that never teaches the child to have any self-control. It's always external controls, so the child never learns. It's just a coping mechanism. And I've said at the bottom, ADD and ADHD, I think that can lead to social marginalization. I think a lot of kids, especially when they're put in the special group, you're just marginalising them. You're not allowing them to learn with everyone else. And I think that mindfulness could be utilised to essentially bridge that gap between students with ADD and students without. Depression. So I think there's an over-reliance on drugs in adults to deal with depression, and I think that we then take that and put it onto children. And a load of different studies have shown that actually antidepressants like serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they don't work with kids very well, and the negative effects are generally pushed aside. And I think it's all a money-making scheme right now. So I think we should be really wary of that. Students with a lower GPA, so in America they do grade point average, it's essentially just like an overall grade for every single class you do. And they found that students with a lower GPA were more likely to be depressed. Being a bully was more correlated with having severe depression. And Neff et al. Explored self-compassion in relation to educational achievement. So essentially, if we learn to cope with failure better, we start to learn better. And I'd said that in my last speech as well. So I think it's about learning to cope with failure better. Alec, slide please. I think we're almost at the end now, so it's dragging on a bit. What does this all mean? So I don't think children have the skills to effectively deal with their environment, and I don't think schools are actively trying to improve that. I think attention, I think we can agree, is the base of our experience. Everything you attend makes up who you are. Depression severely affects attention and your performance and mood in adults. So for kids who have never had the life experience to learn how to deal with these things, it's even more debilitating. And I think that mindfulness interventions provide a practical, easily implemented solution to this. Any questions? Yeah. Chris.
When you were like 7, you used to go around like on a rocket ship.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, were you ever like tested for ADHD yourself? Did like having a lower attention level?
I wasn't. I probably should have been tested for ADHD. Yeah.
Quite a lot of children do get like labelled as ADHD when not just because they got their attention.
Exactly, and I think it's about not just throwing them off into some special group, but actually seeing what the problem is, because it's about the school system. It's about engaging the children in what they want to learn. And I think that I was reading some really cracking stuff on democratic schools and how children learn what they want to learn, because that's how life should be. If you're interested in music, go do music. Like, you can do, the more you do, the more you can do. And I think that we need to address that and keep kids interested in coming to school. I mean, the amount of sick days I had in secondary school, I haven't taken a sick day off from university once. And it's like, I just didn't bother with secondary school because I didn't enjoy it, didn't engage me, and I think we should, deal with that problem. Is that everyone? Great. Super.